Okay, Mr. Chair, the meeting is yours. I will confirm that all members are in attendance for the meeting today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will call the meeting to order. I'll start off by saying happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. It's just a balmy day out there today. Really great in Greene County. Declaration of interest, you can clear it anytime you see fit during the meeting. We'll get right into our report. And I'll read the recommendation. That report CAOR RP 0222 Financial Impact Assessment Rockwood Terrace Project be received, and that the task force provide direction on the scope and costs of future work to be undertaken, and that the task force provide direction on the preferred procurement option as required. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Christine, second by Brian. And I guess there's Andrew right there.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Am I going to turn the meeting over to Andrew or to Madam CEO?
I was going to take it, but Andrew, did you want to say anything before we get started?
No, I just want to apologize. When I went to find the link wasn't there. So I truly apologize to everyone for being a minute late here.
No problem. Madam CEO, the floor is yours.
Okay. I did put together a little slide deck here. It's pretty high level, but I thought it would be easier than watching me recite the report. The other thing I will do, just to apologize, as staff, we've always gone option 1 as being long-term care, and then option 2 was the middle ground, and option 3 was the full campus of care. Surya from Colliers did it the other way around. And this time I've gone back to the way we've done it, which is option 1 is long-term care. So hopefully I've tried to always be clear when I talk about an option about which thing I'm talking about, but just so you know, there is a little bit of difference there so we don't get caught. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, everybody see that okay?
Not yet.
Oh, please. There. Okay.
There.
Okay. Very good.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here this afternoon. This is going to be really much a group presentation along the way. As I said, I kept it fairly high level. I'm sure that many of you at the table have your own questions, and I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for you to get those questions answered. So we'll move through this slide deck in a rather expedited fashion, and then we'll have lots of time to talk over all the different implications of wherever we decide to take this. So moving forward from there, you can see at the beginning of the report, it posed some questions that we were hoping to get direction from the task force and also ultimately from council. First of all, what is the scope of the project that we want to move forward with? The original contracts with Colliers and Kezian are to develop the 128-bed long-term care home. Knowing that council was interested in seeing and pursuing a full campus of care, Kezian has taken that extra step and developed a site plan that it not only includes the long-term care home, but assisted living, village square, and then a further 60-bed seniors apartment or 60-unit seniors apartment as a separate building.
Madam, Madam CEO, may I interrupt just for a second? Do you want
of course.
You want to entertain questions as you go, or wait until you're done?
I'm fine either way. Sometimes it's easier for people if they get to ask a question at the time that they think of it. So if somebody has a question right now, I'm happy to take it.
So committee, please, I cannot see everybody in the screen, so just speak up if you have a question, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair Burley. So not only do we need to determine the scope of the project, but we also need to give some consideration to the procurement model that we're going to use going forward. We've contracted with Colliers and Kezian to do this on the basis of a stipulated sum contract. So that means that there's a fixed price to do the work with a fairly narrow band. of flexibility there. There is the option to move to the P3, and in the report, if you had a chance to review that, it does speak at some length about the various considerations involved in moving to a P3 model. So we'll touch on those a little bit later on. So determining the scope, and this was part of a little bit of Surya's presentation and things that we've talked about in the past as we've worked through developing this project. First and foremost in our minds, I think, has always been what will provide the best quality of life, of experience for our residents and our staff. If we are not doing a great job in providing a quality work experience or a quality life experience for people, I think we may have missed the bus. Next, can we eliminate or change aspects of the project while maintaining the quality? So if you want to look at, what's the difference between one scope or another, I think one of the things that we want to maintain in our minds is what's the bottom line impact to the people who live and work there. Next is the impact to the overall construction plan and the design if we choose one option over another. Not insignificant is the question of what we can afford. And then finally, what are the financial impacts of delaying the independent living and seniors apartments as a standalone building? That does seem to be one option that deserves some exploration. So I wanted you to hear from Jen. We didn't really have a chance to do this the last time we met, and I wanted you to hear from Jen and Karen. A tremendous amount of work has gone into designing the new long-term care home by Kezian, by Jen, by Karen, by a whole lot of staff. And so Jen, do you want to just speak to some of the points here to give the task force a flavor of the work that you've done?
Sure, thanks, Kim. So yes, as Kim mentioned, there's been many meetings, virtual meetings that brought together where Kezian and Andrew and some of his team members have brought together residents, families, frontline staff, leaders to really dig into what is important in terms of the design for the long-term care home. And it was really exciting work and really interesting work. And they asked us a lot of hard questions that made us be really thoughtful about what's important. And so some of the key features that I just wanted to highlight is in terms of room design, the design that has been proposed really affords additional resident privacy. So there would be two styles or two rates of room, private rate, so preferred accommodation, and that's a private room with a private bathroom. And then the basic rate, basic accommodation, is essentially a private room with a shared bathroom. So it would be two private rooms and the bathroom is in between. And so that affords some additional privacy for residents in a few ways. It supports the minimizing of sound transmission and odors. So it supports that. It supports visual privacy by minimizing shared sight lines. So for example, a resident can't see another resident while they're getting care or maybe in the washroom. It also supports infection control practices and supports isolation practices that we are required to do and are important to do in terms of outbreak and infection containment. And finally, that room design also supports staff safety. So an example of that is there's space on either side, in the washroom on either side of the toilet, so that if two people are providing care and support, there's safe space for them to do that. The dining room enhancements are another really key and important part of quality living. And our residents spend a lot of time and look for in the dining room. And it's not only is it a time to eat their meals, but it's also very social. And it residents spend a lot of time in the dining room. So the proposed design is a larger dining room space, but modified so that it's 2 smaller dining areas to support 16 residents in each space. And that really enhances the opportunities for pleasurable dining. It decreases noise, provides a more calming effect, a more community feel. And the dining room can be a place that, if it's very big and cavernous, it can be really noisy. It can encourage some responsive behaviors. Often, there could be more falls in the dining room. And then the other additional enhancement is space to support safe storage of wheelchairs and walkers. And while this sounds like it really shouldn't, it sounds like a bit of a funny thing, it's a big deal. A resident's assistive devices become a part of them. And it's really unsettling for them if their walker is whisked away into another space or into a hallway and they don't have easy access to that. So the design supports some additional space for that to be accommodated. For infection control, some of the items that I've already mentioned, and then just another couple of highlighted areas. The laundry system is a barrier system, and if there's specific questions about that, I'll defer to Karen. But essentially, it's a system for separating dirty, contaminated, soiled laundry on one side, clean on the other, in 2 separate rooms, the way that it's designed. Infection prevention and control in the resident rooms are more easily supported, as I mentioned already. Laundry chutes are in the design, and this minimizes the need to carry contaminated or soiled laundry throughout the building. Those are just some examples. And then finally, the community feeling. The design really supports nooks and seating alcoves for residents to be able to gather naturally. They can gather with each other or with their visitors. And these are featured inside and outdoors. There's cognitive stimulation stations and very few to no dead ends. So it supports natural walking routes for residents who may enjoy walking around. Sometimes it's called a responsive behavior called wandering. And in the design, there are no resident rooms at the end of a pathway, and that will decrease residents wandering into someone else's room, which is a cause of concern for many residents when they move into a congregate setting. So those are just a few of the features that we wanted to highlight and share with you in the design. And if you have any questions, let me know. Karen's here to help answer some questions as well.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chair, it's Brian. I just had a question, if I could, for Jennifer. Speaking about the dining room and infection control, was it discussed to have 2 different entrances to keep the flow of traffic going in 2 different directions? So everybody comes into the dining room in one opening, and when they're leaving, everybody goes out the other opening. I know we don't always have a pandemic, but that's kind of the idea that I was thinking.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And Karen, do you recall?
I have the impression that it's kind of all an open area, almost like an extension of the hallway, but I could be wrong about that. I'm just trying to find. Yeah, I believe, and maybe Andrew can specify, but I believe it's open, so there aren't specific doorways.
Okay, just throwing that in.
I'm just pulling up the plans right now. I think certainly within the areas that were left, because it's at still at the high level block schematic, the exact positioning of doors and circulation is one of the main objectives we'll have throughout the schematic. So I'm taking a note of that, and that's something we can certainly look to add for those reasons, while maintaining the space in the amount of space that's been allocated.
Yeah, thanks. And if I might, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead.
Councillor O'Leary, the other benefit to this design of the enhanced dining rooms is that they're more spacious to allow for that distancing. So the tables can be just a little bit further apart from each other. So I hope we're not in a pandemic for much longer, but it does support that. Gray Gables is an example that has a more spacious dining areas, and it was much easier for them to support people continuing to eat in the dining room rather than needing to be in other small spaces or in their bedrooms, because we were able to keep those tables just a little bit further apart, even add in a few extra tables so that there were fewer people sitting at each table. So this design would help support that.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any other questions from the committee? Christine, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to everyone. I was wondering if there could be just a bit of a discussion with regard to recreational activities and how this fits into perhaps the dining area or other indoor and outdoor areas for just long-term care community activities. Thank you.
And who is going to take Jennifer?
I'll start, but I'll pass it over to Karen. There was lots of discussion in the engagement sessions about what kind of programs do we currently offer, what kind of programs do the residents love to, and asking the residents themselves are important to them, and what do they like, and what would they wish to have if the sky was the limit. And so there was lots of discussion about recreation space and space being multi-purpose. So spaces that could be used for lots of different things. And that's been reflected in the design, both indoors and outdoors. Which is really great, because when the weather is nice, the residents and their families really love to get outside and be able to have, again, those alcoves and nooks where they can visit together. Karen, did you want to add anything? I guess is it the auditorium? Is that what we're calling it? Oh, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not sure if we might have named it the auditorium, but there is designated activity space on each resident home area. But it was also important to the team here. They identified how much they enjoy and use the auditorium. So that's why there is an auditorium type room maintained in the plans so far. It's down on the first floor, but that's okay. So is our current one. We did talk about using the dining room as activity space. And while there might be certain activities that happen in there, like if they were having an ice cream social, perhaps, some of us have worked in homes where activity and dining space was shared. They had no other options. And it always ended up being an issue between dietary wanting to get in and set up the tables, and the program wasn't finished yet. So we tried to stay away from that, not to say it won't be used at times, like I say, depending on the program.
Thanks, Karen. Christine, you got a follow-up?
Yes, thank you very much for that detailed response. At our long-term care committee of management, we spoke about food and flavorful food for our long-term care community residents. And I was just wondering if there was any synergy within the design, that perhaps there was a community garden here. Just throw it out there. Thank you.
Gardens are definitely a part of the discussion in the outdoor design. But if Karen is up for giving a summary of the food system, I can't do it justice. And it's super exciting, the opportunities that will come with the dietary kitchen design and the system for preparing and delivering food.
Sure, thank you. The system that has been presented as an option before us is similar to one that is used in restaurants, where food is prepared in the restaurant, cooked to a certain degree of doneness, and then blast chilled. So the cooking stops immediately, and then the item is held either in frozen or refrigerated state. So that's what has been proposed for the new building, that we would have a production kitchen that would, so all of the food items would continue to be produced here. The cooking process would be stopped at a certain point though, and then when it comes to point of service, the residents would have a choice not only of 2 items, which we discussed the other day is what is available currently across long-term care, but up to basically an unlimited number of items as long as we have them in stock. And once they make their choice, these food items are plated cold and put in a special oven. I can't just remember the name of it right this minute, but a special oven that reheats the plate in, I think it's 8 or 9 minutes, and we can do, it can do several plates at a time. So 16 to cover one of the resident sub-home areas. So in 9 minutes, then we're delivering hot food to the resident and an item of their choice, not just limited to 1 or 2 items. So it's very exciting. And he sent a little video about eggs, right? Because Jennifer asked him, well, what about eggs? So he sent a pretty cool video about how they do poached eggs that start as a soft boiled egg.
Wow. Thank you, Karen. Before I go to Mr. Warden, I'd like to just ask a blanket question to all, Jennifer and everybody. We've gone through 2 years of pandemic. We've learned an awful lot of stuff from it. The province has brought down new guidelines and so on. And do I assume that all the new guidelines and everything are all incorporated into every little thing you do?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep, absolutely. That's an excellent assumption. And yes, we this process of working through what's possible and then managing my expectations and being able to present a design and an option was done with Collier's expertise and leadership, and also Kasian architects, and they've done this before, and they work with Dr. Pat Armstrong. So if we had a question, a concern about IPAC or a question about quality of life, we would work through it and they would access those resources that they have. So everything that we're discussing is been vetted in terms of legislative requirements, leading practice research on quality of life and expectations of residents and families. And we couldn't have done it without the support of Collier's and Kasian's resources. So yes.
Good. Thank you.
Jennifer, if I could also add, I think that's a great summary. As part of this process, also, we are continuously engaged with our ministry assigned project manager just to understand any potential upcoming changes in the pipeline with regards to the design manual. The only one that's been communicated quite confidently with them is with regards to air conditioned and making sure that all different zones within the home are controlled for humidity, are controlled for temperature, which we absolutely will have as part of the design. A lot of the features that Jennifer and Karen provided an update on in terms of noise and acoustics, infection control would be in terms of best practices and not necessarily part of the long-term care design manual, but certainly where we see trends going from a design perspective so that homes are equipped to better handle such as the pandemic.
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Warden, I'll go to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we talk about resident home areas, I've heard references to pods of 12, but then I also hear 16. Which is it, 12 or 16 for these resident home areas?
Thanks, Mr. Warden. The home area is 32 residents. And leading practice is to use design to make the home, to divide that into smaller home-like pods or sub-home areas. And so those are 16. And there's lots of really good evidence that supports building relationships and community, decreasing of noise, and really improving opportunity for quality of life in that smaller sub-pod of the 32.
Understood. So my question then goes back to the dining. So are we talking now about centralized dining, or are we dining in that home, resident home area, which is the 32? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, so every 32 bed home area will have an enhanced dining room that is using design to be two smaller dining rooms that support 32 or 16 in each. But it'll be one bigger space, and then they'll use furniture and different design techniques, because we also need to be able to support staff in being able to have a line of sight on residents and be able to support all 32 residents. So we needed that design to do both of those things, support the staff in doing their job, but also that smaller homey like feeling of 16.
Okay, so really, if I'm living there, I'm going to be dining in a room with 31 other residents, correct? And if that's the case, going back to Councillor O'Leary's discussion about entrances and exits, we're really into a different realm. I mean, when we're looking at the centralized dining, which exists now at Rockwood, we might have more concern about the entrance and exit. But if we're talking about 32 people together, we might have less of a concern about the entrance and exit, except maybe if we had a pandemic or some kind of epidemic on the go.
I would say that's true. And depending on how the space is divided, it might even lend itself to being able to isolate, for example, only 16 people and not all 32. So, that's a possibility too. If one home area of 32 residents has a couple of people that are having some cold-like symptoms, there'll be more opportunity to limit the isolation that becomes a blanket for everyone. It may be only a handful of people will need to have that isolation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Scott, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. I really like the bedroom designs with the semi-private and private. Basically, everybody gets a private room to some extent. So I really like that, and I think that's wonderful for the individuals living there. My question, Jen or Karen, I'm just wondering, in your discussions, now realizing we haven't made a decision on how we're going forward, but what discussions have occurred between the interconnectivity between a long-term care residence and a retirement home residence, as far as recreational activities, dining activities, bearing in mind that we may have a spouse living in long-term care and another spouse living in retirement home, how we can mesh those two, together for common living arrangements?
Jen?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Lots of discussion at varying stages of this process. So, and Andrew can help with so that I'm using the appropriate words for the different stages, but even in the site design of where would the buildings be? Are they attached? Are they not attached? What's the benefit of having the assisted living attached or separate? Those kinds of things. So in this design that's been presented, the assisted living is attached. Lots of discussion about how would people easily get to the assisted living or the long-term care home without having to go outside in February in Durham. So those kinds of discussions. What might the shared recreation opportunities be? How might the use of the village square support bigger community type events where people from the whole campus or from the assisted living and the long-term care home and their visitors come together, to everything to shared loading dock for supplies being delivered, and that kind of thing. The gathering space that Karen talked about, the auditorium, I think we might be calling it a gathering space, and it's also in that entryway of the long-term care home, and it can be divided to be two smaller spaces or a larger gathering space. It has a proposed kitchenette so that families might book it to be able to have a Thanksgiving dinner with their resident, and that could be someone that lives in the assisted living and a parent that lives in the long-term care home coming together. So lots of discussion about the synergies and the relationship between the two sites. And Karen looks like she wants to add something.
Go ahead,
I was
Karen.
just going to say, we also talked about shared services. So might the laundry facility do laundry for the assisted living, and the same with the kitchen production. It is important to note, though, that if we got into an infection control issue, the buildings need to be able to be closed off from one another. So that was considered as well.
Thank you, Karen. Without, I need to ask a question. I guess we'll go to Andrew. I keep harping on, we do not know what we're going to end up doing if we're just going to build a long-term care and that's it. But my concern is very simply is that if we decide to build, say, for instance, just a long-term care portion, there's certain things we can do with that construction for future use. For instance, we would make sure that all the necessary entrances and everything are there already installed in this particular part of the building for future expansion. So in other words, we don't have to go in there afterwards to add on assisted living, for instance, and then have to tear a wall down in our newer building and to reconfigure it for new entrance. But we do that as we go now. Am I safe to say that?
Well, there's still, so there is some work that would have to be done up front as part of the long-term care option only in order to facilitate those further phases or stages. As an example, the penthouse on the roof and some of the mechanical and electrical services would have to be sized and arranged in a way that they can facilitate the expansion for the village square and the assisted living. That's one example. The other one is there would be a portion over the central area of the long-term care home where eventually the assisted living portion of the building would sit over. So we have carried in the cost estimate and would recommend at least shelling out that space and constructing it, because it's very difficult to build on top of an operating space after the fact. So a fit up could be deferred to a further point, to a further stage, if only the long-term care option is selected. But right off the bat, you are enabling that conversion or that construction to happen without disrupting the operation. Those are two that we would certainly recommend if only the long-term care option is selected. However, there will be some disruptions. We'd have to, where the connection is made to the village square, there'd have to be a southern wall that is opened up and connected, and we could plan for it in order to minimize the disruptions. But there's no way of getting around that interface over there because those elements are so connected between assisted living, village square, and long-term care.
Thank you, Andrew. It makes perfect sense. Any other questions from the committee this time? Seeing none, Madam CEO, I guess you're going to proceed.
I am. Okay, you see the screen again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thanks for that great conversation about the design elements. I'm so glad that we got to cover that off. Moving on from there, perhaps if my slide will change. Okay, so now we're going to talk about each one of the three options, and I'll just put some points out here for each of them, and then we can probably talk around them. I'm sure you have many more questions than what I have room on the slide to cover. So starting off with doing the long-term care option only. So this is where all of this began, because the redevelopment of Rockwood Terrace by 2025 is a requirement of our license with the province. As you know, the projected costs have risen about 33% from the feasibility stage last year to where we are today with the Class D cost estimate. And as was indicated, that Class D cost estimate by the cost consultant is just that, a very basic estimate. And there is, as Turner and Townsend notes, a potential of, plus or minus 20 to 30% around the numbers that they've provided. What we do have, based on their Class D cost estimate of the actual construction, then building in the money that the county is already putting away, what we know we can anticipate as far as construction grant and revenue from long-term care residents, that nets out to an estimated annual cost of about $5.3 million. The long-term care option only includes some higher upfront costs. So this option as it stands also facilitates the future options because you're servicing the whole site. Where you're running your utilities, your water and wastewater, you're connecting and extending and connecting those roads. There's some significant money being tied up to service the whole site, even if you only choose to move forward with the long-term care home. The site itself is a green field. It's visually and physically isolated. One of the things that we have touched on over time, and maybe more at the Committee of Management than at Redevelopment, was the need to be competitive, to be an attractive location for people to work and to be an attractive location for people to select to come and live. There are a number of other new long-term care homes coming online in different places with different amenities around them. So again, the question of the long-term care home alone by itself with nothing else around it, I think there's a consideration to be had there as well if we're going to be able to meet those other targets. As we just touched on a moment ago through you, the chair, the current design of long-term care only is based, or the current design overall is based on the integration of long-term care assisted living in the village square. So deferring those other aspects means that future renovations will be required. Those are of an uncertain cost at this time, but I think it's fair to say in our experience that anytime you go to renovate something, it's never as cost effective as if you built it the first time. There would be some degree of disruption to the residents and the staff, and we have been working towards making sure that we're at least net zero ready, if not truly a net zero building, again, as much a cost control effort for the future, as well as just doing the right thing by our climate change plan. So again, this would make achieving those net zero goals, I think, a little bit more complicated and likely a little bit more expensive. So that's the long-term care option alone. We're going to talk about finances in more detail in a later slide. So if I move on from there to the middle ground, the second option, long-term care assisted living in the village square. So at 108.5 million as an estimated project cost, this option is 44% more expensive to build than the long-term care only. It includes the 40 assisted living suites, as well as the commercial space for retail and food service. Due to the additional revenue that Surya calculated for us, the estimated annual cost for this option at 5.9 million is about 11.8% more than long-term care alone. So you see how some of that offsets that project cost. The second option provides a broader scope of services and amenities and potentially a higher quality experience for residents, staff, and their families. It facilitates the construction of a single building envelope, I seem to be missing an E there, and achieving those net zero targets, and eliminates the disruption of a future renovation. So you're balancing those additional costs with some good on the side of quality and experience. The third option, the full campus, includes the 60, holy moly, you can tell I did this slide deck on my lunch, a 60 unit seniors apartment or independent living situation. at a total cost estimated right now of 140 million. This is another 85% more expensive than option one, the long-term care alone. And the annual net cost is about 15.6% more than option two. The biggest concern with option three is, even with the numbers that we know now, the borrowing required to complete this takes us very, very close to our debt ceiling. On the good side, we know that the building, because it's a completely separate, physically separate from the other buildings on the site, it could be completed in the future with little impact to the existing buildings and residents. And also, we feel fairly confident, given the focus on seniors housing and affordable housing, that there may be funding in the future to assist with a specific build just for the seniors apartments. So now we're going to get into the financial aspects of this. And Mary Lou, do you want to speak to this part of the report?
Sure. Thank you, Kim. The first thing I'm going to comment on is just on the borrowing limit. So we've talked previously about our internal policy about not exceeding 10% of our own source revenue. And that threshold includes amounts we've borrowed internally for such things as the Grey Gables roof, the renovation addition to this building, and the future build of the paramedic services base in Durham. We currently have an internal debenture for the one at Chatsworth. Based on the 2021 annual repayment limit, if the campus of care option is selected and the annual repayment totals 7.6 mil, then we would have had about 90,000 remaining. The 2022 ARL was just issued this week. It provides about $316,000 remaining. So instead of having $1.4 million left to get to the 10% threshold, we would have about 5 million. The one thing I will say about that is the financial indicator review that's issued by Municipal Affairs and Housing, where they assess your risk. When you get to anywhere between 5 and 10%, with your debt of own source revenue, they put you in the moderate risk category. And anything exceeding 10%, they call you high risk. I haven't had any conversations with our municipal advisor. I do know one other municipality that has, and asked the question about how does that impact how the province views that particular municipality? Where does it place them when they're applying for grants? And the municipal advisor was unsure. So based upon the costs that have been presented in the report, if we went with option one being long-term care only, we would need about a 2.3% levy increase. So for 2022, 1% is worth 637,000. If you went with option two, which has the assisted living, you'd be looking at a 5.61% increase. And option three, which is the full campus of care, 8.3%. And if the choice was to move forward, we would look at increasing that over the next few years, the transfer to reserve from what we're budgeting currently at 1.36 million to increasing that to come to what we believe would require for the first debenture payments, so that you wouldn't look at that all in one budget year.
Is that it, Mary Lou? I say that tongue in cheek.
I don't know if you have any questions on page 5 of what's in the agenda package, where we look at table 2 about the capital costing of options. I don't know whether you want me to walk through where we get those numbers, or you're just
Mary
the
Lou,
bottom line was.
Mary Lou, before you leave that page you're on now, explain to me, please, when you say option 1, 2.28% levy increase, is that
Yes.
per year for so many years, or is it just all at once?
So option 3, the increase required right now is just shy of $1.5 million. So we currently have a transfer to reserve of just under 1.4 million. So if you were going to look at needing another 1.5 and you wanted to do over 3 years, you would increase your transfer to reserve by $500,000 a year to build to that almost 5 mil. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
The committee have any questions before Mary Lou moves on? I think I can see everybody. Okay.
I only have a couple of slides left, so maybe I'll finish this up and then stop sharing the screen. It'll make it easier for people to see. Is that okay?
Thank you, Madam CEO.
Okay, thanks. All right. So another aspect of this is on we talked about expenditures. What about on the revenue side? So like any project we undertake, staff would look carefully for opportunities to reduce the net project costs for whatever option is selected. This report does identify a couple of things. There's the sale or the development and sale of the adjacent 22-acre site. There's probably a little bit of money there. Similarly, the sale or development and sale of the existing Rockwood Terrace site. Again, there's probably some opportunities there to obtain some additional revenue that could be put towards the bottom line. As I mentioned earlier, there's the potential to seek and gain grant funding to support the future development of an independent living or seniors apartment, if a portion of it's affordable. If we did move in that direction, we do own property in Durham that's an existing affordable housing site, which constructing the new one would free up the old one that could then, those resources could be put toward the project. And finally, we know that Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus is working actively to put together some information to go back to the province to look at what they're prepared to provide as far as construction funding. And I think between Eastern Wardens, Western Wardens, and AMO, I think there's a discussion to be had there. If construction funding has just really, for municipal and nonprofit homes, is really fallen short of where construction costs have us today. So certainly not a sure thing compared to some of the other things on this slide, but an opportunity nonetheless. So there's that. And then finally, on the procurement side, as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion this afternoon, we're currently planning to complete the project construction under a stipulated sum. If we went to the P3, which would only apply if we either went to option 2 or the full campus of care, Colliers told us that just the long-term care itself was not of a sufficient magnitude to really attract competitive offers from the private sector. The report goes into some detail about the necessity for a really carefully crafted contract between the county and the private partner. And like any contract that's complex, it would need to be managed. We know with long-term care, there's a fair amount of sensitivity around what happens with the building, keeping up with requirements and expectations, et cetera. Those things aren't very flexible. And so again, constructing a contract that gave us the ability to make changes when they needed to be made, when you're looking far into the future and those changes are unknown to us right now, would be, I think, quite an undertaking. And then the third point there, how much financial certainty can we expect over the life of the relationship? You're talking 25 or 30 years down the road. The operating and maintenance aspect of this renews on a periodic time frame throughout. And want to be working hard on that relationship throughout the life of the contract to ensure that at renewals, you were going to still be in a good, positive place with that private sector partner. So it's an interesting model. My own personal opinion is 10%, is the potential of 10% enough to offset all of the unknowns and other considerations that would come into it. So I'll leave that there. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Questions from the committee? Mr. Millen, please go ahead. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I think is probably directed to Mary Lou. And I'm wondering in regards to future capital projects, the 10-year capital forecast, if you could speak a little more to how the various options would or will impact our ability to do our 10-year forecast. I've read this piece in the report a couple times, but I need a little more nuance, I think, to get my head around that. To, is it going to absolutely sink our 10-year forecast, or is there room to manage there? If you could help me a bit, please.
Mary Lou?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a great question, Councillor Milne. In the report, we've talked about over $245 million in the 10-year capital. And that was before we've considered any, I would say, adjustments as to do to the market pressures and inflation. Staff is going to have to take a really hard look at capital, both from how much costs have increased and what is the essential elements that we need to move forward. So whether it's a health and safety, whether it's to keep our building envelopes safe, and look at perhaps reprioritizing if costs have changed significantly. And of course, in the report, we looked at it and 70% is for transportation, which isn't surprising. That's a large infrastructure. And then 23% for human services, which would be long-term care, housing, paramedic services, and to the smaller extent, social services and childcare. I guess, so your question about how this is going to impact and whether we can do it all, depending on whatever it is we do. The question back to committee would be, staff can do their best to come up with what actually needs to be done in the 10-year capital. So, if they had to scale back, what would that look like? And then the next question is, what is council's appetite for levy increases? In the past, we've tried to keep the levy increases very responsible, both in respect to how much the property taxpayer can afford to pay, as well as looking to ensure that our member municipalities have room as well.
Brian, go ahead.
So I guess to start, an assumption I've always made is the 10-year forecast is in fact stuff that we have to do or should be doing. Recognizing that, yeah, you're right. I mean, from time to time, you need to reevaluate and reprioritize and so on. But I think what I'm hearing is some of the 10-year forecast, if we proceed with one or two or three option, some of these on the 10-year forecast are going to get tossed. So that concerns me quite a bit, but I'll listen some more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Leary, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary Lou, I need help with some numbers here. The plus minus of 30%, the 130 million, this, I was a little confused too with Kim's. It doesn't take much to confuse me, but option 3 now is the big number, campus of care, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so at 139 million, 532, you add 30% and we're up to 180, 81, correct?
Potentially.
Okay. And so that's the worst case scenario. And the best case scenario goes down to, I think, 41 million.
No, it wouldn't go down to, well, long-term care might go down to 41, but the full campus of care, if you went down 30%, would go down to about 100.
All right, sorry. So I got the
and-
switched over. So it goes down to 100.
And that will get further refined as they move through the estimates, because right now it's a class D.
Right. So between the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, there's $80 million, correct?
Correct.
Okay, over to you, Andrew. Like, I just want to say, do you really know what this is going to cost? Like on a $39 million project, you've got a span of $80 million. Like, I've heard of cover my ass, but like, can you not get closer for a number?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And the reason why we can't get closer at this stage is because the design is at a conceptual stage. So the process we're following right now is not unique to this project alone. It's a well-established process for any project that undergoes design. And so the only way to get more accuracy in your pricing and your estimates is to get your design to a level of readiness that bidders would then submit a price for the project till you're tender ready. We don't want to be tender ready without having cost checks along the way, because it becomes extremely, there's a lot of effort and a lot of costs involved with making changes at that point. So in my opinion, and based on my experience, this isn't a CYA approach, but this is really a best practice of how you use cost checkpoints along your design development to make refinements and adjustments to scope. And it's a standard practice as the design develops in order to get up-to-date information from the market and to make informed decisions. The second piece in terms of what we're seeing in the market right now, I can say we use a professional quantity surveyor or a cost consultant to develop these estimates, who have significant experience in the long-term care space, and reach out to trades when they obtain this pricing. And they've commented on just how volatile the market is. And as an example, how when trades receive pricing, they're able to hold it for 15 days. And that's the maximum horizon that some of these contractors are willing to hold the price. So I'm offering this simply to give some perspective in terms of how we have laid out our work plan and how we expect to get additional estimates as the design develops.
Right.
Thank you, Andrew.
So committee, I'm just being brutally honest here. Like I have to try hard to, like if I'm sitting in my chair in Owen Sound, there's long-term care homes all over the place, sort of thing. So if I'm sitting in Christine's chair, I want to do whatever I can to get that campus of care, because frankly, it's needed. But I can't get there, like just me alone. I can't get away from option number one at these prices. And I'll tell you why. I'm adding the 30% right now. So, if you go to option two, it's not 108 million, it's 141 million. And that's the number I think we have to go by, because that's the worst case scenario. And if we're not prepared to go to that 141, then we can't do it. We can't make it work. But the other thing is, if I do go to option two, and I'm only one person, if we do go to option two, I want to have some kind of guarantee or assurances from staff or somebody that the Grey Gables is going to be put on hold, because there's no way we can do this. There's no way we can get to option two, in my mind, and still do Grey Gables. And so that's where I am. I'm just being honest. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Madam CEO, please go ahead.
The other part of the equation, not only is there the uncertainty around expenditure, the thing I keep coming back to is the uncertainty on the revenue side. We've gone through a period of, COVID aside, fairly stable economic growth, fairly low inflation. I think, generally, a lot of people were feeling pretty good about how things have been going. If we enter into a period of really significant inflation, rising interest rates, that will have an impact on our businesses, on people's jobs, and people's ability to pay. And I think that there's a threshold here that we have to be conscious of, that we can't continually ask people for more money. At some point, they simply aren't able to meet those demands. And as pointed out in the report, the county and the lower tiers, we share the space. And we've always tried to be really respectful of one another, given that there is a fixed amount of resource out there that people are willing to provide as far as just supporting their goods and services and taxation. If the county takes all of that room, we haven't left the member municipalities any capacity to undertake the projects that they need to undertake. And I have always believed that we work in a system, and the system as a whole has to work. Nobody wins if one's doing great and the other one's not.
Go ahead, Councillor Leary with follow-up.
Thank you. So the only other thing I didn't mention is that I'm really worried about is we're so close to this election, and I certainly don't have any information, but I can't help but think that there's not going to be a boatload of money coming everybody's way for long-term care. I just, something's going to happen. And so the timing of this is just brutal. If we make a decision today to go on option 1 or option 2, and a month from now or 6 weeks from now, the provincial government makes a big announcement of a boatload of money that would have bumped us up to getting a campus of care, we're going to be sick to our stomachs. So I worry about the timing of this, making a decision today, but I guess, we don't have any choice. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Scott, did I see your hand up next?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I guess my question through you, maybe to Mary Lou, I'm just looking at the possible project scoping outcomes, and under option 2, it talks about in the Collier's analysis, we would be reducing the operating deficit position of the project, but not the overall project cost. Do we know how much we'd be reducing the annual deficit, operating deficit?
Is that a question for
I don't know who wants to take it.
Mary Lou? Go ahead.
Is that the net operating income, Mary Lou? Would you just pull that off of the conclusions chart from Surya? So the net operating at just long-term care is a loss of 1.7 million. Net operating for long-term care, horizontal assisted living, and Village Square is 719,000, and the operating loss for the full campus of care is 138,000. Those are Surya's numbers. They're not entirely correct based on what some of our own stuff, the money that we have available in reserve, etc. So the situation, I think, is a little bit more negative than maybe this shows.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, when we looked at 40 beds for the assisted living, how did we come up with 40 beds? Because that seems to be, well, in the private sector, that's the money generator is through the assisted living. They can charge out $3,500 or $4,000 a month. So how did we establish 40 beds and not 60 beds, for example?
Andrew, can you answer that? No?
I think that came from the feasibility work that was done earlier, and most recently with SHS, where they were looking at at demand within the area, supply and demand, and coming up with a number that they felt realistically we'd have good demand for those units. And at the price that we would need to have to make them operate effectively.
Scott, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. It just, in the option 2 synopsis, it says assisted living beds are in a critically short supply. So if there's a critically short supply, you'd think we'd be trying to meet that need, but.
I think they're just, you look at the competition, you look where else people can go, and you look at what the price point is, and whether or not, when there's not subsidy funds at all for folks to be able to move into these places. And you're talking, if I'm remembering correctly, and if I'm wrong, correct me, Jen, but I think we're talking $3,500, $4,000 a month, are we not? Yeah.
You. Councillor Millen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of revenue or potential revenue sources too, I know it was mentioned, if we did the assisted living or the independent living, potential sources of revenue would be to sell the current building in Durham. I would suggest that given the demand for affordable housing, it almost sounds like, cutting your nose off to spite your face kind of thing. We're not increasing the ability of affordable housing by doing that. So I would be really reluctant to go down that path, just as a note. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Mr. Warden, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've been listening carefully, and here's where I'm at. The market is so volatile. Just in the last year alone, according to the numbers that I see before us, the per bed for long-term care alone has gone up by 33%. So you're looking at $443,000 per bed a year ago, and today it's $588,000 per bed, and we don't know where that is going to go. So that leaves me uncomfortable. I'm also uncomfortable with the impact on the levy, and I'm uncomfortable with the impact on the annual repayment limit. So that throws me in the camp of long-term care only. However, I think that I could be brought into the middle ground, I would say, a long-term care plus the independent living, because I really like the idea of that village square, and I don't see any other way to get the village square without something else. So we couldn't do long-term care and just the village square. I think I'm hearing that. So to get that village square, which I think would really go to quality of life and make it an attractive place for people to go to, it probably necessarily means that we're going for option number 2. But again, that concerns me. I think I could get there if I knew that our council was proceeding forward. First of all, that we had consensus for that. That look, we don't have this kind of divided camp, which we've had for a number of years. I'd love to see us working together. I'd love to see us finding that middle ground. Maybe this is the middle ground, but I would want us to be there on consensus, and I would want us to be there also, like Councilor O'Leary says, knowing that, okay, we've made this big commitment and we cross our fingers and hope that it all works. But to do that, we are putting to rest some other things so that we can get this done, and so we can still have room to get some other priorities met as well. So in short, I'm a no for the full campus of care. I am a yes for long-term care only, and I'm potentially a yes for the middle ground, which is the long-term care plus the independent living, provided that we have some discussion and some assurances that we are not proceed with other discussions around long-term care development beyond this. We're making a commitment to this, not to say that in the future, other discussions won't come up, but for now, this council would be moving forward with just that middle ground. So there you go. That's my position.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. It's sort of well laid out. I'm still going through my mind what Councillor Leary is saying, and he's scary. He makes perfect sense on what he's saying. And I still haven't got around, in my mind, an answer to all his questions. But I need to think about that for a bit. Any other questions from the committee? Madam CEO, a question before I go to Christine. Do we need to bring the Green Gables scenario into play and make a firm decision that we won't be able to do anything of that for quite a while, or what do we do with that?
There's not a decision to be made at this point. That decision was, council took a decision to defer that. That decision to defer was communicated to the province. They said, if anything changes, let us know. If council wished to move forward, they would need to make a decision. But right now, there's not a decision, an open decision, if I may, that needs to be taken with regard to Green Gables.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Christine, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great discussion by all. Difficult decisions, challenging aspects for certain. The long-term care home is desperately needed for certain. And the idea of having the discussion of a campus of care was an incredible initiative, and would make Grey County unique in this area of Grey County. The full campus of care, as much as I would like to see it to fruition, the numbers are really high. I see the benefit. I see individuals that have their license and may not have their license in a few years and have a very comfortable area to live within a campus of care, and share the residence with their spouse, or their spouse would be next door perhaps, and not really needing the license to drive over and visit every day. So there's a lot of benefits, a lot of quality of care in a full campus of care. And I've just touched on one that makes, that tugs on your heartstrings, quite frankly. But I am focused on option 2, and by that I mean the Village Square and the assisted living. I hope that's still the marker for that option, and as well as the long-term care option as well. I'm wondering, so that's my preamble, so you know where I sit for sure. And at a different time, maybe a different economy, we could look at a campus of care. It's outstanding, and it would be incredible for Grey County. But for right now, I'm just putting that one off to the side, the full option of option 3, option 1, according to the report. But my question is, if we do sell some property, and that includes the existing buildings, what would be the offset to option 2? Would that draw it more closer to option 1 in levy contribution and other financial considerations? Thank you.
Kim, please go ahead.
I can, and I had a bit of help from Randy with this. It's not really enough, I don't think, to get us where we need to go unless we're prepared to really roll up our sleeves and taking a much larger role in that development, which again we would need money, we would need capital ourselves to be able to do that. I mean, I wouldn't want to preempt our ability to negotiate with someone, but I'm thinking in either one of those cases, you're probably looking at $1 million or $2 million in each one of those. So it would be a help, but it's not going to solve our problem.
Christine, does that answer your question?
Yes, it certainly does. And I was just wondering if this committee is interested in putting a recommendation forward to council with regard to an option for our discussion at council, or does this committee wish more time to perhaps provide that option to council, or alternatively not recommend an option at this time to council? So I'm just putting that out, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Christine. As the chair, I'm going to speak my mind just for a second. I would prefer we don't put an option to county council right now to confuse the waters. I agree with Andrew that it's extremely important that we, as a committee, make a recommendation to county council, what we all feel that we move forward with. If it's option 2, it's going to give Andrew and his people a chance to continue with their designs and so on, which is going to really impact pricing as we go. And I really feel that they can make it a firmer commitment what that cost will be once they get to that stage. And I realize we can only read into the future, make our job a lot easier, but we can't do that. I don't know, it's just my feeling. If I would, my thoughts would be that option 2, provided we can afford to do it and feel comfortable and all of county council agrees 100% that is the way to go. I don't leave any choice. We have to do option 1 regardless, do we not? That we have no choice of that at all. So it's just a feeling I got. I think that we should be able to go with option 2 and let Andrew and his people continue with it. We're going to find that we will be able to come up with a firmer figure. I'm going to go to Paul next.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair. Lots of good discussion today. I know there was one point put out there that for an additional 11.8% gives you 40 assisted living beds. Is that good value? You know, that's an option 2. I just wanted to look at that. 75 million at, if you took the 75 million, that works out right now at 588,000 per bed at rough cost. I guess going back to Grey Gables, in a sense, yes, it is put on hold, but there is a further report that was from SHS and further information to come back on that part. So I guess the question I have is, if we go with option 2, even with option 3, where does that put Grey Gables down the road in the sense of ever a hope of something ever happening there? And I think there is another option for Grey Gables, and that's from the only aspect of reapplying to add a wing versus a brand new building. I don't know if that's something worth considering, and I'm not getting into the big discussion of Grey Gables today, but I know that was one thing that certainly would reduce a lot of cost of bringing that facility up to 128 beds, which I think we all agree that seems to be the sweet spot in the sense of efficiency. And that was originally the idea of applying for more beds for Grey Gables, was to try to bring it up to a higher efficiency level. I'll leave that there for now, but certainly assisted living like beds is sort of something that is certainly needed as well. And when I say that 11.8% increase, you get 40 extra beds. There's certainly a value there of creating 40 new beds for senior people. And I think we see that in a sense. I guess the question is, and I think I go back to something that one time Councillor Millen has said, what is the business that we're in? And I know in the sense is the business that we're in is long-term care, is the business that we're in is assisted living. And I guess that's how far do you take it? And I know assisted living does give you revenue back. That's more per bed that generates you better value. And I guess that's the thing, it's a value. I mean, going back to you, Mr. Warden, what you're saying is we're in really interesting times. I mean, even if you look at general real estate from this time last year, who would ever think we're going to be at where we are today from where we were last year when this all, and just the cost and material and all that kind of stuff. It is a bit of an unusual spot for us to be in. It's not going to be an easy decision one way or another, as Councillor O'Leary says. It's about the cost, and then, like it's big dollars, and it's, even from a year ago, even from last August when we had that discussion, it's like it just, it just seems to be so unreal. And I know it's not going to be an easy thing. Something a good economist might say, and I know this may not sound just right, is it something that, is there an option of taking a pause to see if this thing slopes that, like settles down? And I don't know, I'm not suggesting that, but is that something, does anybody have any idea of that pause could give us? I mean, we keep hearing about how can this be sustainable? How can this last? I mean, we see the cost of living at 5.7% right now. We see what's going on in the world. It's crazy. And it's driving everything up. And it's leading to a point where I don't know if it's sustainable. And I know that we all have small businesses. We run business, we, farm business and different things and stuff. I just, it's unprecedented times. I guess maybe it's something that's happened in the past. I guess in the 70s, there's been high inflation. I guess in the 80s, we saw very, very high interest rates. But, I'm not that crystal ball guy. There's just so many variables here. And I think as a commitment goes, excuse me, as a commitment goes, I mean, the issue here, underliningly is Rockwood Terrace is a Class C bed facility. And, we've made, we know that we need to improve that facility to a Class A type facility. I guess it goes back to, I'm not sure who mentioned it. Again, does it go back to the point, maybe Councillor Millen, is there value in that old building now that's there? I mean, is there something there? I raised that a year ago when we talked about it, and I know we had it broken into tearing it down and taking it away, but is there value there? I don't know. Those are just some points it doesn't give you anything substantial, Mr. Chair, but it's just some points to ponder. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor O'Leary, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Great conversation. It's nice to sit back and just listen to people. I find that Kim is really making sense for me. And I know I brought Grey Gables up, and Paul, you don't want to hear this, but we've made a decision on Grey Gables right now, and that's to pause. And it's this committee's decision to make and come up with an option. I think we should make that decision and take it to council. If council wants to do something with that pause, then that's a council decision. Staff feels like we can get this thing to option 2. That makes me almost bet towards my heart more than anything, but we've got to find a way to get this done. So I would say that we should go to option 2. And I'm prepared to move that. So I'll move the recommendation with the option of number 2.
Mr. Chair, I'll second it.
Okay, it was moved by Councillor O'Leary, second by Christine. Do you have any other discussion on the motion before us? Christine, please go ahead.
I defer first to the clerk, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Heather.
That's okay. Just so the committee, I just want to be transparent with the committee that this is an amendment to the original motion, because the original motion was looking for direction. So this is an amendment that the final 2 clauses in that first recommendation be amended and replaced with option 2 being the development of the long-term care home assisted living facility and village square. And then I think, and the CAO can correct me, we also need to provide direction on the procurement method with that as well. So that's just something for the committee to consider.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So, Madam Clerk, are you saying that we'll have to vote on an amendment first, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Christine, your hand is still up.
Oh, I will defer to Councillor O'Leary. If he chooses to move it, I will second it. But and then I will speak to it. Thank you.
I haven't moved and seconded, sir.
So it's already moved and it's already seconded?
Okay.
Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Millen.
Okay, now we'll have a discussion on it. Christine, go ahead.
Chairman, if I might,
Oh.
I apologize. I just wonder, before we get into discussion, Mr. Chairman, do we want to have in the motion a recommendation with respect to the procurement model, or do we want to debate that and have a separate recommendation with respect to that? So in other words, would you like to have a proposal? Because I'll tell you, my leaning is towards a design bid build versus P3, but we can do that either way. We can have a separate discussion about that, or we can put that in there right now and have a discussion about the whole thing.
My thoughts on that would be to have a separate motion.
Yeah.
Very
So
good.
it'd be clear, and that's, Madam Clerk, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if we could add that, we have a separate motion for the procurement section after.
Certainly we can. We would vote on this amendment first, and then we could have a further amendment on the procurement process.
So Madam Clerk, before I ask for further discussion, could you please read the amendment?
Of
So we
course.
understand.
That the main motion be amended to replace the final two clauses with the clauses below. That the long-term care, that the clause below, sorry, that the long-term care redevelopment and planning task force directs staff to move forward with option 2, being the development of a long-term care home, assisted living facility, and village square.
Thank you. And Christine, your hand is up.
Thank you. I think it's important for this committee to provide the recommendation to council for consideration. There's been a lot of hard work with our consultants, with staff, and this committee. And I really feel it's important that putting an option forward. I do support option 2. I believe that is the approach to take for Grey County at this time, and I'm in full support of it. I just have a question for Madam Chair, for Madam Clerk, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Go ahead.
And that is, Clerk Morrison, am I the seconder? I believe I put indicated that I would do that, so I just wanted to confirm for the record.
Yes, you are the seconder. Councilor O'Leary is the mover.
Thank you for the clarity, and I would hope that this committee consider the motion at hand in a positive manner. Thank you.
Thank you. We most generally vote on a motion when it's put on the floor. Mary Lou, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only question was to Heather with regard to, do we also need to include in the motion that staff would be directed to work with Colliers and Kasian to amend the contracts?
We can do that now, or we can do that after, when the procurement piece is discussed. I'd look to Kim for direction on which would be the most relevant connection there.
I think it doesn't matter. We can put it in with the contracting piece as well.
Thank you, Kim. We've had a great discussion on the motion. We're going to vote on the amended motion. That's what we're going to vote on now. And
Councillor McQueen is looking for you, Chair.
yeah, before I ask for the vote, I'll go to Paul, but I'm going to ask for a recorded vote on the amendment. Paul, please go ahead.
Sorry about that. My hand won't go down. Procedure, I don't know if you do a recorded vote on community meetings, do we?
It is, you can have a recorded vote. It's not a weighted vote. It's a one member, one vote.
Yeah, okay. My question is more toward Andrew, and I guess that he said something about design. You have a better idea of the cost per bed and stuff like that. I guess the thing is, and I know we had a conversation at the earlier part of today's meeting about certain design and stuff like that. I guess there's a Chev and there's a Rolls Royce and then there's a Cadillac in between. And I guess what are we designing to, the Chev, the Cadillac, or the Rolls Royce? And I guess the reason being is they all have different costs. And I'm just sort of being to the fact. And I guess once you have that design, how comfortable do you feel that I guess it's hard. I guess I can't put you on the spot of what that price could be, but can you shed any more on that part?
Absolutely. I was waiting for this question to come up, so I'm happy you asked it. One of the metrics that we look at just in terms of a very high level is the building gross square footage divided by the number of residents, and we compare it to other homes that are being redeveloped, whether they are for-profit, not-for-profit, municipal, just to see where this project for comparison purposes. So where we've ended up right now, we're slightly over 98,500 square feet. It works out to approximately 770 square feet per resident. I can say that from an environmental scan and other municipal projects that we are involved with, we often see some that are in the high 800s, some that exceed 900. So we feel that it's my opinion that at 770, this isn't at the highest end of what we're seeing. What I think it is really focused on the key scope and the key elements, excuse me, that enhance the quality of care and quality for the residents. And Jennifer and Karen were very specific in terms of which areas do we want to target for going beyond the minimum. So from that perspective, it's certainly not at the bare minimum where you would see potentially a for-profit target, but compared to other municipal homes, I think it's within an acceptable range and certainly not on the high end.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Millen, please go ahead.
I wanted to ask a similar question, but I'd like to direct it to Jennifer to get some comfort from Jennifer that the square footage that Andrew was just talking about is workable for her and her staff. And the residents, of course.
Sure. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. This was, I joked about needing to manage my expectations as we talked about possible in designing a building. And it wasn't always easy. There was times where we had to really go back and forth on, if we lose a few square feet here, what's the impact to the resident? What's the impact to the staff? What if we look at this space and what about that program? So there was lots of engagement. And with the model, the design that's been presented today, I do feel comfortable that it meets the needs, the things that were really important in terms of dining, resident privacy, resident experience, staff safety, but isn't excessive. And some of the leading practice actually shows that big cavernous spaces, big excessively large resident rooms don't support residents in the way that you might think that it does. It actually limits their interest in socializing with other people and having community interaction. So I feel really comfortable that this meets the vision that was really important to us in being able to color it your way for each resident, but also not going way over the top.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Andrew, for your remarks earlier. Thank you very much for both answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can we go to Christine next?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you to Madam Clerk, would the option within the motion at this time include LTC, ASL, and Village Square within the motion, so it clearly identifies what the option 2 is?
So if I may, Mr. Chair, the motion does read move forward with option 2 being the development of the long-term care home, assisted living facility, and Village Square.
Thank you for the clarity.
Thank you. I believe Scott has seen your hand up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to thank, Jennifer and Karen and all the staff that have worked with Colliers. I'm glad, Councillor Millen asked the question and that you feel our staff and residents would be well served by this new design. I just want to, echo the comments that Warden Hicks made. I think there were certainly some of us that, had ideas, grandiose ideas, based on what was working well in other places. But, economics of it don't make sense at this point in time for Grey County. I am pleased that committee members are leaning towards option 2. I do believe that it does meet that middle ground that I think we can. I don't know if we'll ever get complete consensus at county council, but I think we can maybe get close to that with the decision of option 2. So I think that's really positive. All along, I wanted to make sure that spouses could maybe, if they had the need, could be in the same place with a loved one that was in long-term care. So option 2 would achieve that, and I think that would be very positive to a number of families and would be a selling feature. Kim mentioned that we needed to stay competitive. In my time on the long-term care committee of management, we are competitive based on the type of staff that we have in our homes and the care that we give to our residents. So I think Grey County homes will always be competitive, and it's not necessarily the bricks and mortar that bring a person there. It's the type of care that they receive, and our staff do that second to none. So I'm not concerned from a competitive standpoint, but I do realize that bricks and mortar come into play, especially with IPAC controls and making it easier for staff to do their job. So anyways, those are my comments, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to the vote. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott, for that. Madam Clerk, I do not see any other hands up at this time. So would you proceed with a vote on the amendment, please?
I will so, sir. Voting is done in alphabetical order. So you are voting on the main motion to be amended to go with option 2 being the long-term care home, assisted living facility, and village square. Councillor Burley?
4.
Councillor Warden Hicks?
Yay, in favor.
Councillor O'Leary?
In favor.
Councillor Mackey?
In favor.
Councillor McQueen?
In favor.
Councillor Millen?
Yay.
Councillor Robinson?
In favor.
Motion is carried 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we'll have, we need a motion to look after the procurement side of the scenario. Madam CEO, did you want to make any comments on that part before we say, just to outline what the options we got?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as stated, we're currently operating on a CCDC2 stipulated some contract basis. It would be staff's recommendation that we continue on that basis, and that that staff be directed to negotiate amendments to the contracts with Colliers and Kazan to reflect the enhanced scope of work that you just recommended.
Thank you. Councillor Millen, please go ahead.
I'll move what she just said.
And
However you want to put that together, but I agree. I want to move what she just said. Please.
It's going to be second by Scott, but Madam Clerk, would you mind putting that into a well-worded motion?
All right, so tell me if this works. That the main motion be amended to direct Colliers to use a Canadian Construction Documents Committee, CCDC2 stipulated price contract procurement process, and that staff be directed to amend the current agreement with Colliers project leaders and Kazan architects in order to cover the additional scope of work.
Councillor Millen?
I certainly support the intent there, or the notion there, but you said, Madam Clerk, that this is an amendment, but there is no motion on the floor to amend. We voted on the last motion, right?
Correct.
So this is strictly a motion to do what, right? Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Warden?
Thank you. And just for clarity, what that all means is that we're proceeding with a design, bid, and build proposal and not a P3, correct?
That's correct.
Excellent, thank you.
Scott, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Kim, you mentioned, as far as entering into partnerships, it's not really worth the chance, for maybe a 10% savings and all the unknowns. Can you just speak a little bit more to that, please, for the committee members? Because that's really what struck me, is that, yes, you might save a little bit, but you lose all control, and losing that control does not merit, that potential savings. Can you just speak a little more to that, please?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. A P3 is a complex contractual relationship that will, it's not only about but the construction, but the ongoing operating of these buildings that we would be undertaking. And the relationship between the county and that partner is defined by the terms that are established during the procurement. So you're doing this on the very front end, and then hopefully you've thought of everything so that you can live with the terms that you negotiated on the front end through the whole life of the contract. Michael Letourneau's not with us today, but certainly I did defer to Michael's expertise when it comes to assessing this. So what you're seeing in this report to a great degree is Michael's work. And he asked us to consider a number of things with regard to the operations of the building, the financial aspects of the relationship, and negotiation and documentation costs. Under a P3, each partner would be legally expected to perform its responsibilities throughout the life of the contract. And it's quite possible that a party to the P3 might eventually be unable or unwilling to carry out its responsibilities. I mean, people go into business with all of the best of intentions and they would be a wonderful partner, but something changes throughout all of that. And they decide that they're going in a different direction or they're going out. And where does that leave the county in all of that, right? So you would be all the time, I think, working in the contractual language to ensure that you mitigated as much risk to the county as you could. But my sense of that is that the more you mitigate risk, the more you're going to pay, right? That, if you're going to make it work for you, they're going to make sure that it's going to work for them as well. There may be reasons why the private partner would become unable or unwilling to carry out its obligations. The county's expectations for service to be delivered may exceed the private partner's expectations of the services it must deliver, right? So things are changing, evolving in the world of long-term care or assisted living. We're expecting a level of service up here, and they're saying, you're on a path that's looking like a fairly steep slope. We signed up for this, a little less slope. And we don't want to do all those things unless you want to pay a whole bunch more money. And then you can see how you can get yourself, depending on the partner, and they might start off great and then people change. Now you're trying to negotiate with a partner that you wouldn't necessarily have chosen at the very beginning. And you know what it's like. You can end up having foolish arguments about petty things that end up taking up a whole bunch of people's time. And we're not really, like, this isn't an area that I feel that the county has deep expertise, nor do we have the staff right now to be able to provide that kind of oversight. So we'd be sending this out to a third party to get organized to begin with. And then we bring it in-house and try and run with it. And again, I think we would have to probably have somebody responsible for contract administration for this and other things. And so now you've just added to that overhead.
Great explanation, Madam Clerk, or Madam CEO. I was thinking about the Madam Clerk, that's why I mentioned her name. So we're consistent through our committee, Madam Clerk. I wonder, could we ask, I'm going to ask for a recorder vote in this section too.
That's fine, Mr. Chair. I do want to go back to Councillor Millen because we did not vote on the main motion as amended. So from a procedural aspect, I think this is a secondary amendment to the main motion. Then, as all clerks like to do, we'll round it all up in one nice motion at the very end for everyone to vote on.
Sorry, I apologize, Madam Clerk. I thought
That's
we did
okay.
vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I knew you were right. So since we had a great discussion on this, see no other hands up. Madam Clerk, would you please take the vote on this second amendment?
Certainly. So you are voting on the CCDC and amending the current agreement with Collier's project leaders and Casing to cover the additional scope of work. Councillor Burley,
In favor?
Gordon Hicks,
Yay.
Councillor O'Leary,
In favor.
Councillor Mackey,
In favor?
Councillor McQueen,
Favor.
Councillor Millen,
Yes, in favor.
okay. Councillor Robinson,
In favor.
that's carried 7-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we're going to vote on the main motion,
Correct.
and I believe I had it moved and seconded. When I put it on the floor first.
The original motion was for providing direction, so I think it would be best to find a current mover and a speaker with all of the amendments included in that, or current mover and seconder. My apologies.
Okay, not knowing who they were, I'll say that Councillor Millen is going to move it and the warden is going to second it. Does that make it very clear?
Thank you.
Now I'll ask for a show of hands on this motion before us. All in favor? The motion is carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we are now moving forward with our agenda. Andrew, any comments before I move on?
No, it's very clear from my end. So we have a clear work plan moving forward. Thank you.
Good. That's great. So we're moving on to our agenda. Do we have any other business here today? Scott, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and maybe through you to Kim. Kim, in the report, and Randy was a big part of this, as far as how the rest of the lands down there could be developed. And, you know, we talked around that a little bit today, but what are the next steps in actually taking it to a point, or what do we need to do to start developing those lands that, you know, maybe in a backwards way, the private sector would build some of these, you know, apartments and things that, you know, people would be attracted just knowing that there is a long-term care and a retirement home in the vicinity. You know, they may want to have apartments. And how can we proceed with those next steps? Also bring some revenue into the county, you know. I'm just wondering, you know, what the plan is there. Thanks.
Right. Through you, Mr. Chair, there's some planning work that's happening right now with West Gray, just on the overall site plan here. As you recall, there's a hold on that, on the zoning designation for the property. So I think what we need to do is work through the planning side on this property, on the 10 acres. Get to the next level of detail with regard to the servicing of this site. There are some open questions about berming and that has to happen with the DSPI lands. There's always, as you know, stormwater considerations and things like that, how the roads are going to work. So I think if we work through some of that with the idea that the next thing that we want to turn our attention to is being able to do something more with that other 22 acres. Right now, we know we're bringing a road and we're bringing services up to abut that property. So, you know, if we want to then turn our attention to, okay, what's going to make this the most attractive and useful thing for us and for a developer. I think we can put some work into thinking that through in the next little while. But as I say, West Gray has some planning work going on right now that I think will we can work with them to ensure that we're facilitating a smooth runway to being able to do that. Does that help?
Thank you, Madam CAO. I was wondering, Madam Clerk, before I asked for adjournment of the meeting, I was wondering, since this is a very important topic for County Council, the minutes of this committee meeting goes to County Council for approval. Is there any other way you're going to present it to County Council other than that format?
These minutes will be prepared today and included in next week's County Council package for discussion purposes. Should it be the direction of council that they choose to look at a special meeting of council to discuss this area in particular, that's certainly up to council, but these minutes will be included in next week's County Council package for discussion.
No, I understand. I'm just wondering, is there another format we should use? Instead of just putting it through minutes at County Council, should we put it as a separate item for a County Council to discuss? And because somebody will probably pull the minutes. And I'm just thinking, instead of doing that, is there some way we could present it to County Council as a separate topic?
So these items are going to be a separate item on council. They will be a separate agenda item. Council and committee, the whole minutes are a separate item. The committee redevelopment and planning task force minutes will also be a separate item. So there won't be anything to pull per se. It will be a motion to be moved and seconded, and then discussion can take place on these minutes.
Okay, Christine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was following your question. Would there be a possibility of you as chair providing some background or up-to-date information similar to what Councillor Patterson does as chair of Public Health Board? I'm wondering if that's a possibility where you would be able to provide a bit more context. Thank you.
I can do that, Christine. I think with our skills from our staff, our CEO and so on, may be a better way of doing it to make sure we get it confined instead of putting it back to a chair. It's just my suggestion.
Fair enough.
Not that I would not do it. If I'm instructed to do it, I would gladly do it, but I prefer to have our experts like our Madam CEO present it in that form. Paul, please go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to back to Grey Gables in the sense of the campus of care idea, which is the province was pushing us. Obviously, you know, looking at the cost today and that whole concept is even what we've contemplated here today in the sense of Rockwood and adding to that is sort of probably in the viewfinder of quite a few years or quite a bit of time away. I know the province sort of pushed us to look at a new build for long-term care and repurpose or whatever of the current long-term care. Is there worth the idea of going back to the idea of just applying for a wing or adding or requesting that those beds of the addition be encompassed into an addition to the current Grey Gables? Because the reason I raise that is part of the things that escalated that cost is because we didn't have the funding for the extra beds that we already have. It is a class A facility. It's 22 years old. Is that an option that could be brought forward in a different format, in a more of a realistic possibility versus what was being suggested from the province and what was brought forward in an extremely costly process that's in place today? Could that be something? Because I think originally the whole idea was to bring that facility to a more of a cost-effective, to the numbers that would be more cost-effective than that. And I know back into the Sienna report, they talked about having the bones in that building that could add the 100 beds originally that could be transferred from the original Rockwood Terrace. So is that something, I don't want to belabor it today, but is that something that could be rethought of? Thank you.
Madam CEO, please go ahead.
I think the time to consider that option is if and when the province makes an adjustment to the level of construction funding that they're prepared to provide to municipal and nonprofit homes. If we've gone from where it used to be, which was about a 60-40 split on, on their side, to where we are today, which is, I don't know, what do you think, Mary Lou? What are they paying? Are they paying 25? Maybe. And I think that has to change before we'll be able to. Plus, as you heard today, right? We're really tied up against that ability to take on additional debt. And right now this would still, even with maintaining the existing beds and just putting some new ones in place, we would still be incurring a really significant cost that's increased a lot, even since we talked about this the last time. So I think we really do need to look back to the province to see whether or not there can be additional resources put against that to make it viable for us.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Paul, one last comment?
Well, that would be my thought, in the sense that if there was a reevaluation of proceeding with Grey Gables, that would be part of provision or part of a delegation or part of something to make that ask, right? Is in the sense of that increase. I know, I guess if they increase it one, they got to increase it across the board. I guess that's the unique part of fair and open and that kind of thing. But anyway, I just, I mean, it's been frustrating for the public. It's been frustrating for the community. It's been frustrating all the way along. And it's just in the sense of, I know we agree that to be efficient, you need to get the numbers up to be more efficient. That 128 seems to be that number. But anyway, I thought I'd ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. If we've no other business here today, I'm going to ask. Sorry?
Mary Lou has her hand.
Oh, sorry, Mary Lou, go ahead.
Just to respond to Kim's question, the construction subsidy is just over $1 million a year. So 25 years, we get 25 million, 147,000 on 128 beds. So on the 75,000 project cost, it's roughly 30%. But of course, they give us the money over 25 years because they can't afford to fund every long-term care redevelopment up front.
Thank you, Mary Lou. We have no other business here today. I'm going to ask for a motion of adjournment. Moved by Councillor Larry, second by Councillor McQueen. Let's show of hands, all in favor of adjournment. Thanks, everybody. Good meeting.
Thank you all so much for being so.
Take care, all. Thank you so much.